Thanks for joining us today for Get Ready for 4-H Animal ID Days and Exhibitions. We have Courtney Stierwalt from Indiana 4-H here today, as well as Dr. Cheryl Miller from the Board of Animal Health and Dr. Kelli Werling from the Board of Animal Health. And anybody who has questions, feel free to put those in the chat throughout, and we will get to a Q&A session at the end. We'll get started.
All right, well, this is Courtney Stierwalt speaking, and I just first and foremost want to thank the Indiana Board of Animal Health for their partnership with our 4-H program. Without, our relationship, we wouldn't be doing the industries that we represent justice. So this is an important piece of us collaborating and coming together. And much like you all at the county level field questions, they do from their positions as well. And so it's important for us to make sure that we're all on the same page and understand the importance of things like animal identification and biosecurity as it relates to our state. So without further ado, we will dive right into today's presentation, which will be recorded and published on the BOAH website with links to the 4-H page as well. So I will turn it over to Dr. Miller.
Thank you, Courtney. I appreciate that. And I was going to start out today and talk a little bit about identification for those 4-Hers that are wanting to show livestock at the county fair or at the state fair. Probably one of the first things that 4-Hers need to know about is that if they're going to exhibit any of those species that are listed on the bottom of the slide, which is cattle, swine, sheep, goats, and cervids, which I realize we don't show cervids at 4-H, but they are included in this law. They are required by law to obtain a premises ID for the location where their animals reside. And so that may not necessarily be where the 4-H'er lives. There may be some situations where maybe the animals are being shown or at grandma and grandpa's or at another 4-H'er's house. And so the premises ID needs to be associated with the property or farm in which the animals reside, not where the 4-H'er resides. And as I said, this is required by state law, and it is a confidential number or piece of information. And so any site that's associated with the sale, purchase, or exhibition, and that's where the 4-H'ers come in, is required to obtain this. So to obtain the premises identification number, the person, they just need to call in to BOAH, or they can go to our website and there's a form they can fill out. This is free of charge. There's no cost to obtain this, and it takes very little time to get this premises ID. Once they get it, they will be sent a letter that looks like what they're seeing on this slide. And at the bottom are punch-out cards that have their premises ID on it. And the premises ID is a 7-digit alphanumeric number that will begin with 00. So this slide is basically showing you examples of official ID, and depending on what kind of livestock you're showing, 4-H will have regulations about which animals need official ID, and so it can vary in size, shape, and color, and these are just some examples, but this is not all inclusive. And one of the main things that I want to point out on this slide is that people will ask, how can you tell if a tag is an official ID? And the answer to that is you always want to look for that U.S. shield, which you'll see on these examples. If there's a U.S. shield on the tag, that is an official ID. If there is no U.S. shield on the tag, then it is not considered official identification. So when it comes to your tagging days, when you bring in animals to the fairgrounds or wherever you bring them to be identified for show and 4-H, you want to make sure that whoever's helping with this realizes that they need to look for official ear tags. And if they see an official ear tag, they need to stop and do not remove any official ear tags. Or another way of thinking about it is do not remove any tags that have the U.S. shield on them. These need to stay in the animal. We can always add other tags, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second, but we do not want to remove any official ear tags. So again, make sure any of your volunteers look for that U.S. shield, and they need to check both the front and back of the tag, because sometimes it's on both sides, but other times it may be on just one side or the other. And if that U.S. shield is there, do not remove it. Again, like we said earlier, official tags can come in many different styles, sizes, colors, or even brands of tags. It may be a Premier, Allflex, Shearwell. So you can't go by that. You need to look for that U.S. shield and do not remove those tags. And probably the animals are most likely to have official ID are going to be your cattle, sheep, goats, and swine. So when they're applying tags, when your volunteers are checking the animals, again, leave in all existing official ID. Do not remove those. And if there's a situation where you're wanting to upgrade in technology, you can add a secondary official tag. Normally, we do not like to add more than one official ID, but if you're adding a tag such as a RFID tag, which is an upgrade in technology, you can add that, but you will leave in the original official tag. So that animal will end up with 2 official IDs.
So a question, Dr. Miller, just to kind of emphasize some examples we might see at an ID day. A sheep producer has utilized the round RFID technology, not necessarily common practice, but does occur. So if that's a RFID tag, it scans, etc., it wouldn't be necessary to add our green Cheryl tags that we traditionally use as the RFID for sheep and goats, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, if they already have one of the button style, or maybe they may have a Shearwell RFID tag of their own, then you would utilize that as the official tag for 4-H and not add one of the green 4-H tags. You are correct. Okay, I just wanted to talk a little bit here about placement of these tags, because I know some people have questions about where to place ear tags. And we've got a picture of a cow here, but this can be utilized in other species as well. What you want to make sure to do when you're putting that tag in that ear is that the ear has 2 cartilage ridges, and these are designated by those red dotted lines. And you want to avoid putting the ear tag through those ridges, because that will damage that animal's ear and it'll be painful for them. So you want to try to go in between the 2 ridges, which is kind of, as you can see here, in the center of the ear as you go from top to bottom. And then as you go from closer to the head to out to the tip of the ear, you want to try to place that tag approximately about 1/3 of the distance away from the head. So you don't want the tag out close to the end of the ear, because again, that's going to make it more uncomfortable for the animal. They're more likely to lose that tag. It'll get caught on something, ripped off, and the weight of it could cause the ear to droop slightly. So you want to try to keep that tag, as it's shown here in that picture, between those 2 cartilage ridges, and then closer to the actual head. If you're utilizing a tag that is a clip type tag that goes around the edge of the ear, then again, obviously you're not going to put it in the middle of the ear, but you want to make sure that that ear has enough room in that tag that if that animal grows, it doesn't start damaging the edge of the ear because it doesn't have room to grow into that tag. And again, you want to keep it closer to the head, not out on the very end of the ear, because that's going to be more easy for that animal to rip that tag out.
So in specifics with the shearwell tags,
Yes.
we get a lot of questions. What would be a recommendation for how much ear space you should leave to allow for that tag to properly grow as the animal's head grows?
If you're putting that into a young animal, 4-H, like lamb or kid, I would leave maybe about 1/4 of an inch of space between the end of the tag and the edge of the ear, so that there's a little bit of room for that ear to grow.
And there also is an educational document from Shearwell that talks about proper administration.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. And normally, you're going to put that, like I said, you want to keep it closer to the head of the animal, not out towards the tip of the ear, because then that way it's not as likely for them to tear it out and rip the ear.
I always heard the phrase that it's more like a head attachment than it is an ear attachment, because you want to make sure that it's close to the skull or the head of that animal. It's kind of a way that.
That's a good way to look at it. So reporting IDs. And you can go on to this. So once any official ID has been applied to these 4-H animals, then the person that's applying the ID needs to record that ID and link it to whose animal that they're applying it to. And that information needs to be provided to Extension, and then they will send it on to BOAH. And we have an electronic reporting spreadsheet that can be utilized on our website.
Yep, and we ask Extension offices to reiterate those who are staff on the call. We do ask for those to be submitted at the end of the summer, so that way they're most reflective of any tag changes or issues that they might see. But one important piece about this is kind of the story that those RFID tags tell. And I think that's something that your response time, should there be an issue or incident, that if you guys don't mind sharing a little bit about that.
Sure. So yeah, the importance of the RFID tag is that with the RFID tags, it's very easy to scan those and get that ID instantly. There's less opportunity for any errors in reading a tag, or you're flipping 2 digits around. You can get it more accurately. And once we have those ID numbers, then we can go into our database almost instantly, determine whose tag or what individual that tag was issued to, and determine that if there was an event where we're tracing like a disease, an outbreak or something, we can notify producers in that area almost within an hour. I mean, a very, very short time, to let them know what's going on so that they can take steps and take precautions. Whereas if we don't have that information, it takes days, if not longer, to try to gather all that to get people notified. And at that point, it may be too late. The infection may have already spread. So it allows us to respond much, much quicker and to let people know what's going on.
And then some recovery stories, just to talk about the collaboration between our organizations, where we have, it's July and a steer gets loose and somebody in the next county finds it. They call BOAH, they read the number, and we are able to help track down that individual animal to that owner and have a reunification, if you will, because of that, our collaborative effort and on things beyond just biosecurity.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. We just had a situation here recently that wasn't involving 4-H, but it was with a cervid that got out, but it had an ear tag. We were able to determine who the owner was and get it back to the owner. So the question that we get a lot of times is about replacing IDs. We all know that animals will lose tags. They'll rip them out of their ears, or the tag breaks and they end up with no tag. And so when that occurs, the proper thing to do is to go ahead and put a new official ID in that animal, record it, that this is now the new ID that that animal has, and then cross-reference it to what the old ID that was lost is, so that we don't lose identification of that animal. Because if we have a record of all the IDs that were put in originally, and then you suddenly send us something that's a different ID, we're not going to know who it's tied to unless you tie it back to that old ID. And so once you do that, then you need to report that additional information to the extension and to BOAH. And I think that's about all I have on ear tags, and unless you have any questions for me.
I don't. I think the biggest piece there to reiterate is when in doubt, leave a tag alone.
Don't cut it out.
Yeah, there you go. When in doubt, don't cut it out. And should you have any issues with tags falling out you're listening to this as a volunteer or a veterinarian yourself or our staff, the biggest point of contact first and foremost should be that county office to make any changes and get things properly documented. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and discuss biosecurity and disease mitigation, both on farm or where your animals are housed, and at events where animals from multiple locations are coming together. Just to get started here, biosecurity refers to the measures or procedures that are put in place intended to protect humans or animals against disease or from harmful pathogens such as viruses or bacteria. And then disease mitigation refers to those specific efforts that we practice aimed at reducing the development of disease in the first place. So they go hand in hand. To be able to understand and practice good biosecurity, we first need to understand how diseases are spread. And so diseases can be spread through multiple different ways. One of them being the movement of people, such as employees, family members, or visitors. This can occur and may occur through contaminated footwear, clothing, or contaminated hands. Vehicles and shared tools and equipment can also be a potential spreader or cause of transmission of disease, especially if they're moving between multiple animal locations or multiple animal populations. So it's good practice to make sure you clean your vehicle tires, clean or disinfect tools and equipment, especially if, again, you're sharing them between multiple farm locations or multiple locations and animal populations specifically. Insects, rodents, and pets can also serve as movers of disease or in ways that disease can be introduced into a population. So having a good pest and rodent control program within animal housing areas can help mitigate that risk. And preventing entry of pets into animal housing locations where it's practical to do so can also be a good biosecurity measure as well. Contaminated food, water, or air can also contribute to disease spread depending on the specific pathogen. Also, new animal additions to the flock or herd can cause disease introduction. And then last but not least, animals that have left the farm and are returning home from an event can also bring disease with them. So observing a isolation period for both new herd or flock additions as well as animals returning back home is a good biosecurity practice to prevent the accidental introduction of disease to your herd. There are a few simple biosecurity practices that can be put in place that can really go a long way at reducing the risk of spread of disease, again, at events where animals from multiple locations are coming together. These include, but certainly are not limited to the things that you see here on your slide. Anyone entering animal housing areas should wear clean outerwear that's not been worn on another farm, and either wear disposable boots or clean footwear that can easily and thoroughly be cleaned and disinfected. So that's one thing that can be done. Establishing a point of entry for visitors to enter animal areas can help control both the public visitor traffic as well as animal caregiver traffic, which can help to prevent disease introduction or spread between those animal populations as well. Minimizing actual animal contact to animal caregivers can also prevent disease introduction or spread where it's possible to be able to do that. And last but not least, making provisions for hand washing is also always a good biosecurity practice. And you can consider providing alcohol-based hand rinses or cleansing gels to eliminate the need for soap and water where that's appropriate or where necessary. There are also a few basic steps to biosecurity to prevent tracking disease back to your farm. Some of these things, just to go over them really quickly, if you've had general contact with the public, which you likely will in this situation, make sure you change your shoes. So really the one best practice is to just have a dedicated pair of farm or barn only shoes or boots. So that's something that you can do. If you've been to a livestock market, sale barn, or the fairgrounds where other animals are present at the same time, it's recommended that you would change both your clothes and your shoes. So again, another best practice is to just have dedicated clothes and shoes that are specifically dedicated to the purpose of being in your barn or your animal housing locations or areas. If you've been to another farm operation, it is also recommended that you would shower and then also change into clean clothes and shoes or boots that are dedicated to your farm or animal housing locations. So those few biosecurity steps can help you prevent tracking any disease back to your animals or to your farm operation. So some basic animal husbandry and management practices that can be used to prevent disease spread within your herd, both on farm or when you're at an event where multiple animals are commingling, are seen here. So to prevent disease spread from repeated use of the same needles or medical instruments, it is recommended that whenever possible, use disposable equipment. If you are going to be using reusable equipment, it's recommended that you clean and disinfect between every animal, again, where that's practical to be able to do that, or at least between different animal populations, if you can't do it between every animal. So that would be, for example, hoof trimming tools, ear tagging equipment. You would want to make sure that you're cleaning and disinfecting between animals, or at least between animal herds or different groups of animals when using those types of instruments.
So in our case of 4-H family, if they're all coming from the same premise, then ideally we would be disinfecting between each tag administration, but you're saying, and the population that's utilizing those animals that came from that particular premise and the equipment.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be the next best case scenario. We also, of course, want to make sure that everyone's using appropriate vaccine storage, handling, and administration techniques, as either is written on the label for that vaccine or has been told to you by your veterinarian. Also, make sure to clean and disinfect facilities, equipment, and vehicles. Again, we kind of talked about this between uses or between those animal populations where we're able to do. So, that might be shared scoop shovels or shared water buckets, those types of things, making sure they get cleaned and disinfected between animals or groups of animals. And then also, lastly, but certainly also not least, is to schedule your workflow and traffic when working with your animals so that you're making contact with your youngest, highest health status animals first, and then moving on to animals that may be lower health status. So of course, we want everyone to be the highest health status as possible. This can help you prevent the introduction of disease between populations of animals on the same site or within the same herd. So really, practicing these biosecurity measures both on farm and at these events can help protect animals from disease, and it really does take all of us doing our part to keep our animals healthy. And so those are just some really simple things that can be done in regards to just practicing good biosecurity, preventing the introduction of disease and spread between animal populations, both when you're on farm and then also at events where animals from multiple locations are coming together. So with that, that's what I have really regarding biosecurity practices. Next, we're going to talk about animal health indicators. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Miller unless there are any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. So what I just wanted to mention here briefly is that, and this probably pertains more to our equine exhibitors versus our other livestock, but we want to make sure that the horses that are being brought to our fairs are in good body condition. Occasionally, we've seen animals that are thin and aren't carrying the proper body condition and the proper weight. And that becomes a humane issue in exhibiting these animals, because if the animal is thin and we're trying to put saddles on them and other equipment on them, that can cause discomfort and rub on them, resulting in pressure sores and stuff. So when these animals are brought into the fair, they need to be checked over to make sure that they're in good body condition and carrying enough weight. And on this diagram here that you see on the slide, it indicates some of the areas that we look at on a horse to see if they're in good body condition. We can look at the neck, at the withers, at the area right behind the shoulder, at the rib cage, the lumbar area, and the tail head. And, if those areas are not showing you a good fat cover or muscling, you're seeing bony prominences, then that may indicate that that animal is, probably not receiving enough food and is not maintaining a good body weight. And then if you put a saddle or other equipment on them and you're riding them for extended periods of time, that's going to cause that animal discomfort. So it's important that we look at these animals as they come into the fair and make sure that they're in the proper body condition so that it's a pleasant experience for the animal and the 4-H'er.
So some points of intervention for that would be when you're working with your youth at open rides. Obviously, again, not every animal attends an open ride, but that would be a place and appropriate place to have a discussion about that. What resources, if they're unsure, if a leadership, an educator, or a volunteer is unsure about making that justification, who might they reach out to for?
A good person for them to reach out to is any of the local veterinarians in that area. They can always ask the 4-H'er if they're utilizing a veterinary clinic or a certain veterinarian, and then they might want to recommend, you might want to have your veterinarian come out and check your horse and make sure that there's no underlying cause why it's thin, and the veterinarian can body score the horse to give an indication of its body condition, and then make recommendations on what changes might need to occur. Maybe it's just an increase in the amount of food to help that horse so that by the time the fair comes, they'll be in better condition.
And with our vaccination process annually, those 4-H members should be working with their veterinarian. So, that's an important part to emphasize to your 4-H members too, is to there is a place on that vaccination for body conditions for questioning, and that would be something that, you'd want to work with that local vet to figure out ways to improve it, or, there's times where they might be a little over conditioned, so
And
how to work through that as well.
that does occur too. I've always said that, we get a lot of calls here at the Board of Animal Health to go out and check out animals that are thin. We probably should get just as many calls for those animals that are overweight, but we hardly ever get calls for overweight animals. But that is true. An overweight animal that is suddenly being asked to be ridden all day long, that's going to be stressful to that animal. So it's really good to work with their veterinarians and make sure that animal's in good body condition and not overweight and ready to be exhibited.
All right, well, that is kind of our slide deck and conversation for today. And I don't know if there are any questions in the chat box, but if you've thought of any, now's a great time. Also, just remember that you can always follow up with the BOAH or myself at the State 4-H office and continue those questions.
We do have a question in the chat that asked, does the body condition score notation in vaccination form need to be filled out by the veterinarian of record, or can we accept a general form from the 4-H family?
Well, with the rabies requirement, the veterinarian would have to be legally, they're the only ones allowed to administer that. So that would be putting that into practice, that yes, the vet would have to be overseeing that as well.
And it's good, I think it's good to have the veterinarian do the body scoring assessment, because that's a neutral party that is assessing that animal and maybe looking at it with a clearer eye, because, we're all prone to make, we all think our animals are in great shape and maybe we're not seeing them as they really are. So it's good to have kind of that neutral person come in and make that assessment.
And another question, what kind of disinfectant would be best for tag applicators?
That is a great question. So a lot of times, we recommend, if you're wanting to use it, there are a lot of disinfectants that you can choose to use. And certainly we don't recommend one over the other, but would recommend type of disinfectant, right? So something like a hydrogen peroxide or an alcohol-based disinfectant would be our recommendation just in general. So we're not necessarily going to throw out any brand names or anything like that out there, but certainly would recommend that as a general recommendation for really any type of disinfecting, not just for ear tag applicators, but that would be one example.
Are the wipes thorough enough, or do they need to physically have like a water or what am I thinking of? Oh, a dip. Or a,
Yeah, so really, I mean, the important part of disinfection is also the cleaning stuff that happens beforehand. So you can't really disinfect organic matter that is left on whatever piece of equipment that you're using. So most importantly, it needs to get cleaned off and then applied. That disinfectant needs to be applied. So something like physical removal with a wipe should be appropriate. Dunking is normally fine too, but you also do kind of need that physical removal of the dirt, debris, whatever is on that piece of equipment, and then the application of that disinfectant. So, you know, if you're disinfecting something that's still dirty, it's really not getting cleaned and disinfected appropriately.
Right. And something else to keep in mind in this particular question about ear taggers, if you are using an alcohol-based disinfectant, you'll want to let that dry or remove. I mean, you don't want to douse it in alcohol and then immediately go and tag an animal because it will sting. And then that animal is going to have a very negative reaction to that procedure. So if you're using alcohol, you want to consider that and, you know, let it dry before then they go and do the next animal.
We did have a question to ask if guests on the webinar today are would be granted CE credit. If anyone wants to email us, the email address on the slide today. If you're on the phone, if you want to email us, we're happy to send a CE statement on that. Otherwise, I can make that available to anybody who's on here if I have their email addresses, which I should have that on registration. So, and give us a few days. If you don't get something and you need it, just shoot us an email and we'll take care of that. Next question was for reporting official tags to the Board of Animal Health. Will state 4-H office provide directions for that, or should the educators make note to do so later this year?
So we did discuss that in our fall presentation of Animal ID. So that resource is available on our internal base, the hub, but that document that we utilize is also posted on the Indiana Board of Animal Health. So it is under that location there to download that report. It does read, I think it says the words veterinary use only, but that is the document that we've been directed to use and complete. If they have questions or need directions for that, feel free to reach out and I will forward the exact link.
Those are all the questions we have right now.
All right.
If someone's on the phone and wants to do *6, they can unmute themselves and ask a question. We do have a few people who are participating by phone. And what is the deadline for getting 4-H paperwork in this year?
So our ID deadline for all 4-H animals is May 15th. So
May 15th.
yeah, and that is a Monday, I believe.
Okay. So we want to remind folks to start a little early.
Yep.
Don't wait till Monday afternoon.
Yep.
To call the Board of Animal Health to get your PRIM number. Right.
I always brag on you that you can be quick, but when everyone's calling, but that's something that I tell families they could do now. Doesn't have to wait until the last minute. So, all right. Well, the 4-H folks and volunteers again, I will direct access to this link. I will probably also include that document just as a reminder as well. So, okay, we appreciate your time today.
Yep. And we'll make this available on the Board of Animal Health YouTube channel here in a few days.
Okay.
Thanks for tuning in.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Great. Thank you, everybody.